Oh boy, I am powerless over drugs, alcohol, and codependency. My name is Arlene, and today I choose recovery. Hi, Arlene. Hello, hi. We're trying to figure out, how do you sit 3 people in recovery? We don't know. We're doing our best here. Now, okay, so I've been thinking lately. I know that's a dangerous thing. I know. Anything that comes after I've been thinking lately usually means I have to get with my sponsor immediately. But in any case, I've been thinking lately about how recovery doesn't happen by accident. I think that I hoped on some level when I first came into recovery that recovery would be like an osmosis kind of thing. You know what I mean? That I'd hang around at some meetings and somehow magically recovery would just like happen for me. And you know what? I tried that. I tried that for 3 years. And all that got me was a whole new level of crazy, okay? Me without drugs, me without alcohol, and without a program, trust me, is a whole new level of certifiable crazy. So I have been thinking about how recovery has to be very intentional. Because when I got to a place where I could see that after all that crazy, that if I wanted to gain any kind of peace, I was going to have to make the effort to do a few things. Then, when I got to that place when I realized that, I finally did them. That's when I did them. It took effort. God had always been doing God's part by putting all the possibilities of recovery in front of me, but I was the only one who could actually take those possibilities and run with them. I needed to use my will. That will that everybody says is no good, well, it is good. I needed to use my will to align it with God's will. I had used my will for so long for things that were really, really bad and not along God's will. Now I needed to do it a different way. And that meant that I had to engage in recovery in an intentional way, not just a haphazard way, but really discipline myself to do it intentionally. Now, at that point, when I realized that, I found out that many others had done the same thing that I was experiencing. In fact, they had played around with recovery for a while before realizing it was going to take some intentional discipline around the places of recovery, the people of recovery, and the practices of recovery in order to get well. I knew I wasn't alone. So I began to do the things that only I could do, right? I began to seek God. I began to attend recovery meetings as though I needed them like air and water rather than just like candy, right? And I got a sponsor, and I followed her directions when she gave me recovery directions, and I let her lead me along working the 12 steps. I did that, and I sought service positions in Alcoholics Anonymous because that's where I came in. I became intentional. I disciplined myself. Now, here's where it got weird. All felt well and good, right? But here's where it got weird. I don't know, but I probably suspected, looking back, that there was going to come an end to this intentionality around recovery practices, people, and places. You do the thing, you get better, you get out of there, right? But I found that honestly wasn't the case. In fact, the more I learned about recovery, the more I realized that those who did not continue to work each facet of their program of recovery tended far more to return to their old ways than those who continued to practice recovery. Some of them, particularly some of the ones who were once very happily recovering from drug addiction, actually died with this sort of experimentation. Others didn't die, but their lives were not happy, joyous, and free. And I saw then that recovery actually was a way of life. A certain scripture comes to mind And when I talk about the intentionality of recovery day after day, one day at a time, which, by the way, I just want to tell you, that becomes a joy, not a chore, because when you do this stuff, it actually brings you to be happy, joyous, and free. Sort of like the metaphor I like to use in my head anyway is sort of like work, right? Most of the time I like going to work, right? But sometimes I do not like going to work. But I tell you what I always like is getting paid. Right? Okay, so the scripture that comes to mind is from the book of Hebrews in the Bible, where the writer of Hebrews is encouraging people to stick with following Jesus and doing it intentionally. And if you look in the book of Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 4, it says this. It says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, and by the way, we are surrounded by these people. They're long-term recovery folks that we see. So therefore, since they're surrounding us, right, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. And we do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion, who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and now he's sitting in the place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and you won't give up. After all, you have not yet given your lives in your struggle against sin. And like I said before, we know those who have drifted away, and they have given their lives for that experiment. And we're still here. Each of us who are sitting here, we have another chance. So today, I thought we'd just do some straight talk with Kip and Rochelle, find out their experiences with being intentional in their recovery. And I know for me, people talking about how they did it has been vital to my recovery, and that's why I keep going to meetings to hear that. So today, I've got some questions for them about their practices, recovery people in their lives, and places of recovery, both when they started out in their recovery and now. And so we're going to just try this thing. They're going to introduce themselves with the date that they started their recovery, and we're going to hear their wisdom, and I, for one, can't wait. Let's give them a hand before they start. All right, here we go. Rochelle.
Hey everyone, my name is Rochelle. I am powerless over drugs and alcohol and codependency, and my sobriety date is January 15th of 2012.
Woo! Awesome.
Hello everyone, my name is Kip. I'm a grateful Christian who struggles with addiction to alcohol and drugs. My sobriety date is September 20th, 2013.
Woo! Now, I love these guys because one of the things I know is that they're really intentional about their recovery practices. We talk about the 5 essentials of recovery, right? Jesus, 12 steps, sponsors, meetings, and service. And basically, these questions are going to run along that. And so I thought I'd, ask both of you, tell me about how and when you accepted Jesus as your higher power. I mean, was it before recovery? Was it after you came into recovery? What was your experience about that? I mean, we need higher power, right? So what happened?
Okay, so I see these questions beforehand, and so I thought about that for a minute. And I remember at first when I read that question, I thought the moment I knew God was real. When I first thought about, I was sitting here at this church and I was worshiping, many years ago, and I was still high out of my mind. I may have had like a couple hours where I had, been sober, or that's probably not sober. I hadn't used in a couple hours, and I'm sitting back there. And, I was overwhelmed with this peace, and I'm crying, and I feel like this certainty that God is real and that everything's going to be okay. But I didn't ask when I realized that God was real. It asked about the higher power. And for me, what I've come to learn is, a higher power is a power greater than myself that can do for me what I could not do for myself. And at that time, I didn't realize that there were things I couldn't do for myself. I was still trying to do this recovery thing. I'd keep showing up, and I'd keep going to AA meetings and CA meetings, and I'd keep picking back up. So for me, it was sitting in jail. I was sitting in jail for long enough for the fog to clear, and so I had a couple months in there, and I realized I was completely doomed. That when I walked out of that jail, there was absolutely no way I was not going to get high again. And I was scared. I had realized that, no matter how bad I wanted to stay sober, I couldn't do it. And at that place, that's when I realized that's what that God was for. That he was that higher power that was going to be able to do for me what I couldn't do for myself. Because if I stayed in that place of being doomed, there was no chance in trying to get recovery. And so that's when I realized, that this higher power was this thing that I needed to seek after, because if I didn't figure out how to seek after him, then I was going to keep getting high.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Rochelle. Hey, Kip, what about you?
Well, when I was really young, my drug problem was I was drugged to church. And there were some seeds and a foundation laid. So I believed, but I certainly didn't follow. And so when I came to recovery, when I first came to recovery, though, this time, this is my second time around, and I was only going to be here for a little while to put the fire out. And I remember early at a meeting, I began to pray so that I wouldn't pick up a drink, and that was working. And the most I could muster was the shortened version of the Serenity Prayer. And I was at a meeting, and this guy says, he was all hyper, and he said he was a Jesus freak, and I thought he was a little off. I can say today I'm a Jesus freak. What happened was my life stayed unmanageable until I began to thoroughly follow the path. I had to believe, and that's our first step, is believing in Jesus and believing that he's real, as Rochelle said. But Jesus always said, he always followed that up with an action. Follow me after that. And I had to thoroughly follow the path. And so it was, I had to thoroughly follow the path of recovery in the 12 steps, and then that led me to, my higher power has always been Jesus, and so that took me back to going to church, and I find that the two have intertwined and meshed, and it has deepened and enriched my sobriety.
Thank you, Kip. And how about you, Rochelle? Today, what is Jesus to you today as your higher power? How does that work in your life?
I'm still powerless over drugs and alcohol and codependency and any crazy behaviors that might come ahead of me. So Jesus today as my higher power is the person that I go to that's, going to carry me through the day. He is the one that's going to give me the strength to do the things that I still can't do. Like when I find myself angry and I need to pause, I go to him, and he helps me find clarity through those things.
Yeah, what she said, exactly what she said for me too. How about getting sponsor and working the 12 steps? A lot of times, sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm okay with God. Sometimes people aren't, but sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm okay with God, and God's going to do everything for me. But, getting a sponsor and working the 12 steps, do you have any good stories about that, Rochelle? What was the easiest thing about doing that? What was the hardest?
So I just recently thought about this. I was talking to a sponsee, and this recently came to mind, but when I got sober, I was convinced that I was going to get married to my kid's father, that we were going to live this happy journey ever after, and I needed to help him stay. I had this plan that God had determined for my life, I was convinced. And then I started meeting with a sponsor and learning how to hear from God. And she would help me to make the decisions which were kind of going in the path of taking care of myself and discerning between what I was trying to make happen and surrendering, because I didn't know what surrender meant. And so my sponsor helped me to walk through the steps, because everything that I thought I was hearing, especially new in recovery, I look back today and I think I was crazy. I don't know how she sat there and continued meeting with me. But so my sponsor helped me to just discern, what I was hearing and I was so full of lies. I didn't know what the truth was. And so my sponsor helped me to put my hand, and I hear it in the rooms, put my hand in Jesus' hand and walk along with him, because I didn't know how to do that. And so she walked me through those steps, through these 12 steps, because I didn't know. I couldn't have done it, by myself. I was in denial.
Was it hard? I mean, was it hard to, finally get a sponsor and start that journey?
No, that for me wasn't hard because that was the one thing I knew that I had to do when I got to that desperate place. I had to do that. And so I just asked someone to sponsor me. I found someone that had what I wanted and I asked him how to get to it. And, my life is greater than I ever could have imagined today. It was nothing what I thought I was going to figure out.
Well, there you go. Okay. Thank you, Rochelle. How about you, Kip? I mean, sponsor 12 steps, easy, hard?
It's not easy asking another man to be your Valentine. And my first time around in recovery, I did not get a sponsor. So, as I said,
if anybody wants Kip for a sponsor afterwards, you can just say, Kip, will you be my Valentine?
This is not, since this is not my first time around, not getting a sponsor, I got drunk. It's kind of like, there's an old story that talks about the person who represents himself in court has a fool for a client. Same thing with sponsoring. And I was running down that same path this time around in recovery. And about 6 months in, I was at a meeting with two friends, and one of them asked me who my sponsor was, and I pointed back at these two gentlemen and said, well, one of you two guys. And so that's how I got my first sponsor. And he took me through the steps, and he began to, I saw a shift in him. And I asked a few people, and they told me, just because you've spiritually outgrown your sponsor doesn't mean you need to get a new sponsor. But when he relapsed, it was time to get a new sponsor.
Yeah.
I had gone through the steps, but I knew that I still needed someone to be accountable to. And so I spoke with my wife, and that's how I got my second sponsor. And there is a story in the back of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that says, if you stick around long enough, you can sponsor your sponsor. And my first sponsor is now a sponsee.
Wow. Those two guys that were, that you said one of those guys, did they fight over you, or did they try to pawn you off on each other? I mean, which way did it go?
I think the one kind of pointed to the other, which ended up being a good thing, because that other gentleman's name kind of popped in my head when it was time to get a second sponsor, but he struggled with different issues that I've had issues with as well, and it wouldn't, not an alcohol or drug issue, but sexual integrity, and that, so not the right person for me, even though he was a good friend.
Sure, we say that sponsors in 12 steps are essential. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I could not walk through the path on my own. And so there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that says two are better than one. When one falls, the other can pick them up and carry them, and that's what a sponsor does. And not that they're, I carry the message now. I don't carry the alcoholic, but we need someone to walk us through the steps, someone that's gone through that before. Well,
that's certainly been my experience as well. How about meetings? I mean, one of the 5 essentials we say is attending meetings, and how did attending meetings grow your recovery then? And what does attending meetings do for you now, today, Rochelle?
So I was reflecting on this, and so when I first started recovery, I was finally desperate. Man, I was going to use, so I was desperate to do these things these people told me. So they said 90 meetings in 90 days. Well, I got afraid that if I missed a meeting, I was going to pick up, and so I went to 90 meetings in 90 days, and those meetings are what, I had some really cruddy friends before coming into recovery. So those meetings were where I was finding fellowship. I was finding other sober-minded people that were seeking after the same path. I would hear somebody share something I was going through. So I'd find wisdom in those meetings. And, again, fellowship. Fellowship is very important, like home groups, finding some place that you can be accountable to each and every week. I could not hold commitments before recovery. And so meetings were places that I could start living out this new behavior as well. And so that was very important. I did not have family walking in, and I found a new family. I found a new family in the rooms of recovery. We became the back porch disciples. We were all hanging out at the house, and that was, as a result of fellowshipping and meetings with people.
Yeah. How about today? What do meetings mean for you today?
Meetings are still very important to me today. It's where I keep my sanity. Many meetings, many chances. That's for today too. I have much more opportunity to stay sober minded today. by going to meetings. And so I attend different ones, as well. It's also a place that I can give back. It's a place where I find sponsees. It's a place where I get to share my experience. And, actually sharing your own experience from my experiences, the more we get to share our own experience, it's kind of also that affirmation.
Yeah.
You get to relive what God has done in your life. And there's something that it does not only for the newcomer that's there, but also for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Kip? Meetings then and now.
Early, it was the fellowship. I enjoyed the fellowship,
Sure.
and this time around, I was blessed, or God was leading and guiding me. Many of the meetings I was going to were literature-based. If I was going to thoroughly follow the path, I had to know what that path was, and without the literature, I wouldn't have known. And I still love literature meetings because I get to hear other people's take on certain paragraphs and certain sentences, and that has helped me in my journey of recovery. And then at some point, Rochelle, it shifts. I'm not just going to meetings for me anymore. I'm going to meetings for others. First off, the fellowship, all my friends are in recovery today.
Sure.
And then it's, where am I going to meet sponsees? Where am I going to meet people that I can help? And so that's one of the primary focuses of why I go to many meetings. And I still go to many meetings. There's, I think, 1 or 2 nights a week that I'm not at a meeting.
Yeah,
I
you're
have to have a little bit of
everywhere.
balance.
You are
I am
everywhere,
married,
Kip.
but it's, I get quite involved, and it deepens and enriches my contact with God, my relationship with Jesus, and then also a lot of giving back as well. So
I'm glad
I
you
enjoy
said that.
meetings.
I'm glad you said that about deepening and enriching your relationship with Jesus, because I find that to be true too. All the meetings that I go to, some people are like, oh, I don't want to go to the traditional meetings, AA, NA, AA, SAA, Al-Anon, all of those things. Because we can't talk about Jesus around there, and that's simply not true. I mean, our higher power can be anything we want it to be, but what I do find is by going to meetings, I experience Jesus working in people's lives behind their back. They don't even know what's going on, and he's everywhere. And I know my faith in him grows every time I go to meetings. I was told, and you guys probably have had this experience too, that the easiest place in the world to help people who are suffering from the same thing that God has freed you from is the place where they're suffering from, what God freed you from, which is, they're walking right in the doors of recovery. Much harder to go to the 7-Eleven when you're buying a Coke and say, hey, are you suffering from alcoholism and addiction? Can I help you today? This is very difficult, right? So, but we go to a meeting and we know that there's all kinds of people there. Okay, speaking of service, because this kind of ties into the last thing we're going to talk about today is service. Service is one of the 5 essentials. I have found it to be essential in my recovery, but why is it important to you, Rochelle? I mean, why is doing service in the program important to you?
Well, they say, and I found this to be true, we can't keep what we have unless we're giving it away. That's kind of a program motto. But even from the beginning, the service commitments in the beginning kept me going to meetings when I didn't feel like going to meetings. And then the service with sponsees, man, get a sponsee and start walking them through steps, and that grows you tremendously. That's been my experience, is a lot of growth with working one-on-one with sponsees. But it's also to sit back and to watch the light come on in the lives of the people around you. There is something that I just cannot explain that makes my heart full. And it's why I do what I do. I believe that God has transformed my life, for me to partner with him and to go out there and to be the light and walk hand in hand with others, shining their light. It's almost like I have a new purpose today. And so that's why service is important to me. I couldn't imagine, just sitting at home and not doing this anymore, because this is who I am. Mm-hmm. And there's others out there sick and suffering. And when I walked through this door, someone was sitting in these chairs carrying the message to me, and I would not be here today. So it's almost like a civic duty for me to carry the message to others.
Absolutely. It's a way to live out love, right? Like it says on our shirt. Absolutely.
Early, I was given a position of chairing a meeting. And like Rochelle, it made me accountable to going to meetings on a regular basis. And then you just want to give back that which was so freely given to me. And that service gets me out of me. It gets me out of my head, and me is the problem. So it definitely helps there. And then, Rochelle mentioned, when I walk someone else through the steps and you see that light come on, and you see the transformation and the change. It tells us in the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous, this is an experience you must not miss.
Yes.
And it is. It's pure joy. It's that living out love. It's what we're called to do. It's not just the program of the 12 steps of recovery with traditional meetings, but the Bible with discipleship. It's true discipleship is what we're doing. And it's such a joy to give back. And I find that, they say that nothing will so much ensure immunity from a relapse as intensive work with another. So that service work is so important to me that I do a lot of service. But it's a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like in the beginning, wouldn't you say your experience was this way as well, Rochelle, as mine, that in the beginning it may have seemed like, okay, I have to do this, obviously, but now it's like, wow, I get to do this.
Oh, for sure. It was for sure. In the beginning, it was kind of like that. Again, it was that accountability. Oh, I have to go do this,
right?
Yep.
Like all of the stuff we've
I have to do
just
this.
talked
I
about.
have to answer the phone because the sponsee's calling. I have to do those things. And then after you do it, it's a joy. It's a privilege. It's a joy to be able, I get to do this today. Like my life has been transformed and I get an opportunity to do this today.
Let's give these guys a hand. Thank you for your answers. This is so amazing. Thank you. Sharing your recovery journey. I want to, what do we get? Okay, there you go. I want to call the band back up at this point. And right now I'd like to invite all of you who are here today, us all of us, to evaluate our intentionality and the discipline of our recovery. Where are you at? Where are you at? Examine your soul. Where are you at? Where are you at with pursuing a relationship with Jesus and attending meetings and using the wisdom of your sponsor, or maybe just getting a sponsor, knowing you need to, and then doing it? How are you doing with working the 12 steps of recovery with that sponsor every day? And how about giving back? Where are you giving back what was freely given to you? This altar is going to be open as the band plays the last song to ask Jesus for his help to go forward. He wants to help us do this. He's called us to this place. Many people are not here in this place, but we are. And we get the opportunity to do these things because, like our shirt says, we want to live out love. And these are the ways that we learn to do it, by getting closer to Jesus, getting a sponsor, working the steps, going to meetings, and doing service. And we can't live out love unless our recovery is secure. The closing scripture, whether you're at home and you make your home a place of prayer if you're online, or if you're here as you come to the altar, or even if you make your seat a place of prayer, the scripture that we can ponder as we come to pray is also from Hebrews chapter 12. A little bit later on from the one that we read earlier, it's verses 12 and 13. And after encouraging people to run the race with endurance, the writer of Hebrews says this: "So take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. Mark out a straight path for your feet, so that those who are weak and lame will not fall, but become strong." Come to the altar to take a new grip on your recovery.